Sorry about the delay. Without further ado, welcome everybody to the second part of the three-part series. The three-part series of the world's purpose according to the Tanya Jewish philosophy. And first part last week, which is on YouTube and Facebook, talks about what is the purpose. What is Judaism's end game, ultimate goal? And we spoke about that. In very short, we made a point that Judaism believes in many worlds, in different realities that realize God's presence as being, either very aware of that, very conscious of our life source, or different filters of that, culminating in the physical world where the obscurity is at its greatest. You can't see your life source. And the Medrash says, the Tanya points out, that the whole purpose of everything, meaning the higher cosmos, the higher realms, and the lower realms, is this lower world. Because God desired that specifically in this world where there is a total hiding on God, we call that bad, that us with our free choice can bring the light that actually comes from the extra light that comes from being converted over from darkness. In other words, the fact, albeit we are, let's say, more handicapped than the angels spiritually, we have free choice. We get to deal with darkness and reject it and bring light into that. And that is worth everything. God chose that to be the most desirable thing in the entire cosmos. Now, and it spoke about how the fact that we can see, the fact that we feel like we exist is because God is hiding his overwhelming presence. But mitzvahs have a special effect that they, at the one hand, they draw in godliness to the world, and they are called Oz. Torah is called Oz, strength. It somehow fortifies our existence to be able to receive God's presence when Mashiach comes, still exist and feel like an existence, yet at the same time be totally aware of God's essence. That's a special thing that the mitzvahs do. Okay. Now, in chapter 37, it talks about the mechanics. We all know the famous ideas, Chabad is famous, do a mitzvah. A mitzvah, every mitzvah you do changes the world. Or the Rebbe, quoting from Maimonides, said that we should look, it's in Maimonides' laws of, I think, Teshuvah, that a person has to look at the world, that it's half-half. And that your mitzvah can tilt the scale and bring redemption to the world. And the Rebbe quoted that many, many times. But how? Why does a mitzvah bring redemption? Meaning, is this something that we can appreciate logic? What's the process? What does it do? You do a mitzvah, what happens? Just bam, God just brings a flux of energy into the world. How does this work? So before we continue, anybody want to give their any ideas they might think of? Why does a mitzvah change the world? Not just help, meaning you give a poor person charity. Okay, you help that poor person, you brought redemption to that poor person, but in addition, you're changing the world as well, I mean beyond that person. Okay, so the chapter 37, if you have the book, the Practical Tanya, it's on page 409. Or if you have lessons in Tanya online, you could Google lessons in Tanya, chapter 37. And it quotes a very famous, probably one of the most common quotes of the Rebbe from Tanya. The Rebbe spoke, Rabbi Schneerson spoke in his leadership from 1950 till 92 when he couldn't speak anymore. He spoke tens of thousands of hours publicly on many ideas. And of course, it's based on Tanya or ideas, and he would go beyond that. One of probably the most oft repeated quote of his was the following from this chapter. And it goes like this. I'll say in Hebrew then English. Tachlis hashlemus hazeh. The fullest expression of this reality of God, of us creating a dwelling for God in this lower realm, will happen in the time of Mashiach and the revival of the dead. Since at that time there will be a disclosure of the blessed infinite light within this physical world. Meaning, we said Mashiach comes, there will be God's presence, will be revealed, it won't be hidden. All of that, all the great revelation, the great harmony and oneness, and the world reflecting truth and God and all that, all this is dependent on our actions and our worship and prayer throughout the whole period of exile. In other words, you want to have the world in its perfect form when Mashiach comes? Okay, great. It is dependent on our, or more importantly, your and mine, actions throughout the whole period of exile. Now, that's amazing. Meaning, let's take that statement and unpack it. First of all, there were different periods in Jewish history. Spiritually, there was a time pre-exile when the Jews lived in Israel and had the two temples. And that spiritually was a time of some great, compared to now, a great revelation. God was revealed. There was a miraculous presence felt and experienced in the temples. And Jews had mitzvahs. It was post-Sinai. They had mitzvahs then as well. And then in 70 of the Common Era, we were exiled. It is saying that our actions, in general, but particularly in exile, that is what causes Mashiach to come. Why do you think that? Why do you think your action now, when you do a mitzvah, a small mitzvah, you don't feel good about it or feel anything, you just go do it, that is one of the things that is the only thing that is bringing Mashiach. So he gives an example, a very famous saying called schar mitzvah mitzvah. The reward of the mitzvah is a mitzvah. What does that mean? That it's not like the reward for a mitzvah is heaven. or the reward of a mitzvah is some other reward. No, the reward of the mitzvah is the mitzvah. In other words, as an example, when you tell a child to go clean their room, and the reward will be, I'll give you ice cream. The work was cleaning the room, and the reward was unrelated to that. It was just randomly chosen as a reward. It could have been another reward. It could have been $10. It could have been a privilege. It was ice cream. But in our case, God tells us that when we do mitzvahs, it's not like, okay, you do mitzvahs, I'm going to make a magical world. That's not the point. When you do the mitzvah, that is the reward. What is that? Why is that a reward? Because what is a mitzvah? It says a mitzvah, when you perform it, every mitzvah you do, famous, you might have heard this a few times, mitzvah comes from the etymology, schar mitzvah mitzvah. Mitzvah tzavta, connection. Every mitzvah is a connection. Every mitzvah is a connection. Every mitzvah is a connection to God's infinite. And more so, you're actually bringing, it's like opening a window to receive God's infinite light through the mitzvah. And that God's light now becomes enmeshed in the physical fabric of the world. Now, what's happening? We have to go back to, first of all, I want to just make a little point here. Why does he say specifically the mitzvahs in exile? What about the mitzvahs in the times of the temple? Those are mitzvahs. What about, when the Jews left, got the Torah? We weren't in exile for another, 1,000 years or so. Why not? That didn't bring Mashiach? Meaning, why specifically? This is a sort of a side point, but it does mention it. Mitzvah specifically now, when we're not at our spiritual peak. Those mitzvahs bring Mashiach. So it quotes here an idea is that we said before, God, what did God choose to have? What did God choose to desire? Light from darkness. There's more darkness in exile. So there's more opportunity to create the light that is transformed from the darkness. Meaning, if that's the purpose, you have more raw material here of dark than you did pre-exile. So that's why, and in exile, it progressively gets darker in the sense of spiritually, every generation is a little more removed from Sinai. Is a little more removed from Sinai and is therefore spiritually darker, but that's great opportunity to create the light from the darkness. The famous story of two shoe salesmen who two company reps, and one is sent to an island to start selling the company's brand of shoes. And he sends a message back, please send me the next boat back. This is not a market for us. They don't wear shoes here. And the other rep said, when next time was sent, he says, send me another 3 boatloads of shoes. Nobody wears shoes here. There's an open market. So it's something to think about in a practical sense when we experience a darkness, a time of God's presence sort of hiding, it's a time to okay, this is especially where we can bring through dealing in the proper way, we can bring the light from the darkness. I happened to learn last week an edited talk of the Rebbe. There's a project called Likutei Sichos Project. It's basically making an 8-year cycle to go through the Rebbe's edited talks, his most authoritative written works. And it asked that question, and asked why does it mention in the Tanya that the Mashiach, I mean the revelation, the world, being the way it's supposed to be, a world like Adam and Eve pre-sin in the Garden of Eden, where it was a physical world, but you saw how it was a reflection, or it was an extension of God's oneness. You saw how all the different stuff in the world was really a depiction of God's oneness. And that's what Mashiach will be. We're going to see that, and we're going to be able to just grow in that. We'll just grow in God's infinite oneness, connecting more dots. We're going to learn, it says, Maimonides says, the time of Mashiach will be a time of just the study of the divine. And anything that helps, all the knowledge that helps that. I mean, a lot of maybe the secular wisdoms will also be taught, but only because it helps. Science will be developed even more because it'll help show the oneness of God in reality. But it asked that question there. And it brought a very interesting idea. And I'd like to share it with you. So once you understand chapter 37 main point, I'm going to take you to this talk of the Rebbe, which goes the next step. The main point is, again, your mitzvahs, because every mitzvah brings light into the world, you're bringing God's light into the world. That is a mini Mashiach moment. Collectively, throughout history, that we're all refining parts of the world, experiences of life, different our souls, and collectively, we all brought light, and then the light just turns on. There's a tipping point. Enough light was brought into the world through all of our actions, all our mitzvahs, that the light is now on. The fabric of obscurity that's stopping us from seeing it gets overwhelmed because of all the light every human being did as an inside job, bringing light into the darkness, and now it's light. And that's Mashiach. The light's turned on. Okay. One more point before I say that extra thing. If you remember in chapter 7 in Tanya, we spoke a couple of terms in the Tanya glossary. Klipa, right? Klipa is the shell. It's a Kabbalistic term for the shell, the husk that covers over God's presence in this world. That's the term. The veil that hides God is called klipa. There's two types of klipa. There's the totally impure klipa that is till Mashiach comes. It's a total veil, and anything that gets its energy from that total veil of obscurity is called impure. Meaning you can't reattach it. It's till Mashiach comes. A pig gets its energy from, because the Torah is the book that's telling us that the pig, his energy is from the totally impure klipa, and therefore you can't eat it to engage in it. You can not eat it, and that also has an indirect, your free choice by not eating it affects it. That's that. But there's another klipa called klipas noga. So the bright klipa. What's a bright klipa? Isn't that an oxymoron? The bright veil of obscurity, right? Because klipa means the veil that hides God's presence. That God makes happen, God specifically does that. But how could it be bright? Bright is usually a term used for revelation of God. Klipa is a term of darkness. So the answer is the bright klipa is translucent. It's translucent, meaning it's a husk, it's a shell over the thing, let's say a cow. It's not necessarily a holy thing, but it's translucent. You can see how with your Torah engagement with it, it can be utilized in a holy way, brought and revealing God's presence, right? You can take the cow and slaughter it according to halacha, and then make kosher meat, of which you can use for eating to be healthy, or Shabbos, or to say a bracha. And you took physical material, but it wasn't like unthinkable that it could be utilized with the person's mitzvah protocol and reveal the spark of goodness in a very revealed way. Make it holiness. Holiness means it's openly revealed holy. Kosher food has a openly holy utilization in this world. That's klipas noga. So it's saying in here, when you do mitzvahs with most stuff in the world is klipas noga. Most stuff is not forbidden. I mean, a lot of food might be forbidden, but even a pig, you can utilize the material for something. I'd say 90% of things in this world are not forbidden. Entirely forbidden. There are some things actually that are entirely forbidden. Like if someone worships a statue, an idol, it is entirely forbidden, not just to bow down, but even to utilize to any benefit from it. But most things aren't at that level. Most things are some way through eating, through preparing, through the material, utilizing it for a good life, a productive life, to do a life of mitzvahs. And with that, it all the physical stuff gets brought along. I want to point out a good line I heard that this actually changes the way we look at Torah and halacha. Is Torah and halacha a bunch of don'ts and God controlling us? Right? Don't do this. Showing me your obedience, Jews. Do this and don't do that. That's the way some people think Jewish law is. It's a bunch of do's and don'ts. But based on what I just said, that back up. There's a spiritual reality of this world. There's holiness, there's klipa, unholiness, and then there's translucent unholiness. And our purpose in this life, he says, what? As King Solomon said, bring the extra light from the darkness. And that's why we're engaged with stuff that's dark or unholy. And either through avoiding the totally impure stuff or through utilizing the neutrally impure stuff, we are making the world the best world possible. So the Torah and halacha is not a lifestyle that's just showing your obedience to God or not. It's your guidebook. It's your field book. This is the stuff you should engage in. You'll get the maximum holiness bang for your buck with this stuff. A cow, kosher, vegetables, whatever. Certain jobs, some of them are appropriate, some are inappropriate. Certain behaviors are appropriate, some are inappropriate. The Torah is saying, you want to make the world a better place? Okay, here's the stuff, the stuff, the material, the activity, the behavior that will do that. And don't waste your time in the stuff that's going to just delay or contribute to the existing veil of obscurity of God in this world. Be part of the solution. So the Torah is really it's a guidebook of how you should be spending your energy in this lifetime on, to be an agent of healing and redirection and light. It's a very important foundation to have before we talk about Torah mitzvahs, that there is a spiritual energy to everything, and there's effects in everything we do. And we don't know that. Can we rely on a human being of flesh and blood to say, oh, okay, I intuitively know exactly what is going to be the activity that brings healing and God's presence into this world, or not? You don't know. We're by definition blind to that. But as the Rebbe's father actually said, that is in a way what the Talmudists, the great rabbis going back to Moses, they were those that saw. They weren't just rabbis discussing and making a decision. They actually were spiritual, Moshe was a prophet. I mean, the Talmudists weren't necessarily prophets, but they did have divine inspiration. And it's like we're like blind, and they were. The Torah in general is our guidebook, but the rabbis of the Talmud were those that could see a lot of the deeper dimension the Torah is talking about, and make the fences, make the direction to keep the body of it, that us blind people to spiritual reality can still, even in a time of darkness and not seeing, still know what to do and what not to do. And even more so, we do it better than them because we bring more light because there's more darkness. But we need them to tell us not to grope in the dark and actually to be productive. We had a question before. Have we been moving away from the oneness since Eden? When do we turn the corner to move back to it and towards the time of the Rabbi Mashiach? Have we turned that corner yet? Fantastic question. Well, okay, let me back up. From Eden, the world got progressively worse. And it took till Abraham that it was really bad. It said the Shekhinah, God's presence, went 7 steps back. But then starting with Abraham, with Abraham, he started to bring God's presence 1 step from the 7th to the 6th. It went up. It said it went to spiritual realms. So it went from 7 to 6, 6 to 5. Yitzchak, Yaakov was the 3rd, till finally Moshe, the 7th generation, Moshe brought it back to this world. He gave the Torah, right? Meaning Eden, there was the Torah was just naturally felt in the world. Then they sinned. Then it got progressively worse. But then Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Levi, Kahas, Amram, the generations, 6 generations, till Moshe, the 7th generation, finally brought it back into the world. Brought the presence of God through the Torah. God was revealed. We said last week that it was a mini Mashiach by Matan Torah. God revealed himself into the world. The world wasn't yet refined through our thousands of years of mitzvah, so it couldn't handle it. And therefore, it wasn't sustained. But since Avram, but for sure since Moshe, we've been sort of continuing that process of bringing God's presence into the world. So, does that answer your question? I mean, since Avram has been getting better, as far as we've been getting closer to Mashiach. As far as the difficulty of it, the difficulty has been progressively worse because we have less spiritual feeling and instinct and eyesight than they did 1,000 years ago.
So, Yitzi, is the idea that we're on a trajectory currently that was started at Sinai?
Yes,
with the giving
exactly.
of the Torah?
Exactly.
Okay. And so that trajectory, so in a sense, we already have turned the corner since, was that the corner, is that the idea?
So a question, do we turn the corner? So I think there's two parallel things happening. We have the tools and ammunition to get us towards Mashiach since Sinai. At the same time, we have, it doesn't get easier necessarily. It's not a linear growth.
Okay.
I mean, it's I don't know if it was linear. It's definitely a lot of growth, but it's progressively harder. Now, the beauty of that, we said, is, and that's what the Alter Rebbe alludes to, doesn't go into it at length, our actions in exile, meaning in the greater darkness, we're bringing greater light. So yeah, so we've definitely turned the corner, but the question is, we still have problems. There's still, the world is still fractured.
Right. I guess when because you were asking earlier about the purpose of a mitzvah, and it seems like there's a certain understanding that it actually changes our reality.
Yes.
Towards bending our reality towards the
so much change that you just instinctively, human beings, instead of having jealousy as a natural thing, they're going to they're not going to be jealous for example, when is a child jealous? A lot of times a child is jealous because they simply don't understand the way things work, right? They think if they don't share, they'll have more. Really, if they share, their parents will give them more, right? And the candy's inconsequential towards money, which the parents have more of. Meaning, a lot of problems in this world come from humanity's innate misunderstanding or initial selfishness and misunderstandings. And that still exists. But every time we do a mitzvah, we're taking a chink away at the armor of that psyche, that collective human selfish preservation psyche. And now it doesn't always, you don't see it directly, but it does have an effect.
So is the idea that that the arrival of Mashiach or the time of Mashiach comes through a sudden epiphany, or is it something that we see coming?
It's a very good question. It's very interesting you're talking. By the way, before I forget, Rabbi Vogel is going to be giving a JLI course called It Can Happen, about Mashiach, a thorough course by JLI in a couple of weeks. So it interests you to get more, a more thorough course. It'll be happening in a few weeks. If you learn that course, you'll tell me the answer.
Now here, let me just tell you real quick. When I several years ago, when we used to live in Brooklyn, I knew some very observant people who told me they felt like the fact that we have the internet and this digital world that is connecting everyone, they said in their calculations, that was a sign. What the digital reality was allowing us to do was not only bring everything together, but see beyond our own, help us see beyond our reality.
The Rebbe spoke about technology, not the internet, but video cameras and.
But they saw it in their calculations. It was an indicator that we are living in the
absolutely. We are absolutely these. See, here's the thing. A lot of things are happening in the world. I think this course will talk about it, that are messianic. I actually want to play, if you give me a moment, I'm going to play a short video that will give the point. Just trying to find it. I think it was a very good video. Okay, I can't find it at the moment, so I don't want to take too much time. A lot of things that we're living through today are simply, if you would have told somebody 100 years ago or 200 years ago, they think you're talking from the time of Mashiach, right? If you would talk about the quality of life and the abilities that the average person has today, it's miraculous. The fact that in your hand you have access to all wisdom in this world is crazy. The fact that we can afford food that was kings didn't dream of. Now, the fact that we, the comforts we have, the internet, like you said, these are all spiritual innovation. These are all scientific progress, which, by the way, was predicted by the Kabbalah thousands of years ago. It said in the year 1840, or the equivalent of 1840, on a verse by Noah, it said there was a flood. The flood from the lower, the water, the waters of the abyss opened up, and the waters of the heaven poured down. And he said, the Zohar wrote in 1840, there's going to be a flood of wisdom, of spiritual wisdom and earthly wisdom from the abyss, scientific wisdom. And 1840 was right before the Industrial Revolution. And it's hand in hand. The Rebbe talked about this, that and in 1840 Hasidic, discourses were being given in a crazy amount. Divine wisdom became accessible to the common person. So back to your question, these are all indicated, these are all Mashiach-like. There's still human psyche, there's still impurity in the world, right? And that's when every single person, when each person does what they can, individually, you are refining your part of the world. And what do you mean you're refining? You're refining it that it can handle a deeper, harmonious perspective of reality, of God, that things come from God's life force. And we're all connected. And we're all in this together. That becomes the normal way of thinking. But right now it's hard because we don't easily act like that. When we do it anyways, we are refining ourself, we're refining our sphere, and we're refining a part of the world, which has a connection, which all parts are connected, of bringing the revealing God's presence. Till enough of that happens, and there's a tipping point when it becomes a tidal wave of consciousness. So I want to talk, I'll do a little more next week on this, but I want to add a point here. I found this an amazing extra idea from the Rebbe on this. So it says here, again, this very famous quote, all the revelations of Mashiach, meaning revelations, how you'll see how stuff isn't just stuff. It's part of a cosmic plan. It has a creator. It has a purpose. You'll see, that's revelation. Right? You won't see just a styrofoam cup. You're going to see how it's intrinsically connected towards a greater purpose, and so on. Okay. It said specifically our actions in the time of exile. We mentioned before, exile is more darkness, and therefore there's more opportunity for light. But I learned something that was a whole new perspective. The Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, one of the ways he taught Hasidic philosophy is not like, okay, you're going to do this, and then God's going to superimpose some type of revelation on you. That, he said, is not the ultimate. Because why? God desired, what was the mission statement? God, the Medrash says, God desired a dwelling place in the lower realms. What does it mean a dwelling place in the lower realms? When I go, if someone goes into someone else's house and they say, here's $1 million decorated over the way I want it, did the host make the guest really feel welcome and part of the home? No, the guest was, just superimposed and, paid for a whole new house. God wants us, with all our limits, to realize not only to bring God, to invite God in, but to show how we, with our limits, already are part of God. I mean, not just let's invite the infinite light in, that's true, but to also show how already we have the godly ability built into our finitude, right? That's a lot more harmonious, where God and us become really one. It's not like, okay, stop being you, bam, God now just like superposes consciousness on us. Like we were blind to this, and now God says, okay, lights on, here you go. But what about our blindness? That wasn't brought, that wasn't a receptacle, seemingly, for God's revelation, right? Our hiddenness, our finite, limited seeing, what's going to happen to that? It's just going to go away. And by the way, it's not just a small question. That's a lot of who we are as creations. We are autonomous feeling beings. And that's why we have free choice and we can do great partnership with Hashem. But our autonomous feeling of self, how is that going to behold God? Unless you're going to tell me we're going to stop having a feeling of self. And we're just going to feel like one big ball of light. But it says clearly, the prophets tell us in the prophets that all flesh will behold God. Meaning we're going to have flesh. We're going to feel like a human being. But with that humanness, we're still going to, with that, through that, see God's, we're going to see God with our physical being. But isn't that an oxymoron? How does that make sense? Isn't the physical, by definition, that which hides and can't comprehend God's oneness? Right? Isn't that the definition of physical? Physical is called the lowest compared to the higher spiritual worlds, because there the physical hides on it. So you're telling me that the physical hiddenness is going to see the revelation. How does that work? And you can't say, oh no, God's going to just erase your hiddenness, and you're now going to start seeing. Because that would mean that we're not really, didn't really earn according to our albeit limited abilities and our limited existence, really partnered to become able to have that revelation. You're saying, like, the body is the hurdle. You get over it, and then you're going to be rewarded with the light. The body has to come along. There's an argument amongst some of the Maimonides and Nachmanides. When Mashiach comes, the different phases, but the ultimate phase is going to be people in a body or people just as a soul. Maimonides says the ultimate is a soul. End of it is we're just souls. And Nachmanides argues, no, we're bodies and souls at the end of it. And Hasidic philosophy agrees with Nachmanides. The body's got to come along. The body's going to see God. Even though the body seems to be the last thing that can see God. So here's the Rebbe explained how the body, we can already appreciate the body has a certain, albeit a tool of hiddenness, has a certain connection to infinite seeing of God. And that's hinted in the words, our mitzvahs in the time of exile are what bring Mashiach. Exile historically was a time of self-sacrifice for the Jewish people, right? Exile was when Jews got oppressed for most of exile, right? True or false? True. Meaning exile is characterized by Jews having a lot of sacrifice to stay Jews, economic hardships, and even martyrdom at times to keep the faith against all the odds and the oppression that they had to go through. And yet, we find the funny thing about self-sacrifice in Hebrew Mesir Nefesh, that the harder a situation becomes, the more the Jew reacts with defiance, right? That when the non-Jews just, economically oppressed the Jews and didn't let them have fair trade, okay, the Jews, they managed, they coped, they squirreled away acorns, they took care of each other, okay. But then when, throughout history, different non-Jewish groups said to the Jew, here's the sword, you either die by the sword or you convert out of Judaism, and they were martyrs. We find that sometimes more pressing situation causes an outpouring of Jewish essence. In the words of the Talmud, that to get oil from the olive, it must be squeezed. Oil is the essence of the olive. So we see how let's make it very binary. There's hiddenness on God, and there's revelation of God, right? And everything can fit into that paradigm. Exile, hiddenness. Time of temple, revelation. Mashiach, revelation. Exile, hiddenness. Body, hiddenness. Soul, revelation. That binary, think for a second. Hiddenness, right? More oppression on the Jew. Exile. Exile is just all about oppression and it's exile's hiddenness. And yet, the more hiddenness elicits greater soul revelation, right? The more the Jew was oppressed, the more they had a certain Jewish feeling and solidarity. And not just solidarity, a Jewish feeling of self. hiddenness, oppression, exile, for some reason, it reacts with revelation, feeling of your Jewish spark. So we already see God built it into the world that hiddenness causes a reaction of revelation. So now we can appreciate how the body, when Mashiach comes, the physical body, will see godliness. How? Two ways. One, like we're saying in chapter 37, we're going to speak more about at length, that everything in the world has klipas noga energy, translucent, husk, and then we utilize it for mitzvahs. We draw light into it, or we utilize, let's say, as it says in here, an example, we use leather for mezuzahs and tefillin and sefer Torah, right? So you're using something that's created with a certain physical makeup, certain qualities, and you're utilizing those qualities as a tool as a tool of mitzvah. So that's stage one. Stage one is that the stuff we use, we're using it as a vessel, as a tool to elicit God's energy into the world, right? You take leather, you make it into tefillin, you're using the physical leather, and you're eliciting God's presence in the tefillin and the prayers. You light Shabbos candles, same idea. You kosher food. We'll talk more detail, more specifics. So you use a cup to make kiddush. You use the cup, its physical makeup became a spiritual vessel for the kiddush. Okay. But the Rebbe added another point. The cup, not only did you use it as something that could draw blessing, draw God's light into the world through the Jew using it to make kiddush, but actually, the cup, but more so with the person. So the person, we use our arm for tefillin, we use our mouth for mitzvah, for saying blessings. But we also see another point, that the body, which is the epitome of hiddenness, when it encounters hiddenness, it brings out more revelation. So I guess more hiddenness is a sad thing many times, but it has a certain eliciting of revelation. And that shows that the hiddenness already is connected to revelation, because it's such a 1-2 punch. And now we can appreciate how when Mashiach comes and God's revealed in this place, it won't just be, okay, you Jews, you did your best, you little kindergartners, you did your best with your blind spots to go make a home for me. Now I'm going to blow your mind away with, oneness. Our bodies, we did the best we could with our bodies and our abilities by doing mitzvahs with our bodies and time and life cycle. But also, we see that our bodies, the hiddenness of our bodies, the hiddenness of divinity, somehow brought out of us, I want to do a mitzvah even more. It draws essence out. So you already can appreciate how hiddenness, physical, it's almost like a chemical reaction. Too much hiddenness, it pushes back. I want revelation. So this is a summary of the first part. We'll do one more part next week of how mitzvahs actually change reality. Because the mitzvah is the reward itself. The mitzvah is what is bringing light into the world. and the ultimate reward, the ultimate goal is a world of light, of feeling connectedness to our godly source. Every mitzvah is connecting that thing and that person to godly source. Collectively, we can openly realize how we're part of the godly source. And your mitzvah can do it. And everybody's got to do it. And it's very important to remember, everybody's got to do it. There was the Rebbe in 1991, 30 years ago from this past Shabbos. The Rebbe, it wasn't a Shabbos, it was a Thursday, but the Rebbe said one of the most shocking, to the Chabad community, shocking talks. And he essentially said, you know what, I'm just going to show it to you because I think it's a very powerful thing. It's not good. Okay, I'm going to show you a real, 1 second. This is the, this is this is a big thing in Chabad. This was it was a watershed moment. 1991. I should make it louder. Okay.
Gesagt, was kann gibt das jeder von euch und tut alles, was kennt und setzt in Maschinen, denke von mir, Mamos in der Leben, die in Jahren von die Teo, aber den Kehlen, die Tichon, und wir hier lassen, als so gefühlen, 2 Nieden, was werden sich einnachten und sagen, als sie muss nicht werden. Bei den Nebensten ist das Amt Scheyerefu, ושלח צלה ונינו וחתסנו ומחלטונו is a sichere Sache, der Rebische wird darauf bringen, der Gula Hamitis war schlimm und denke von mir Mamos und auf eine Meise, was sich noch tun in dem, auf zu geben machen, jeden von nach Apatschlich auf Zdoke und wir hier lassen, also ich habe und alles, was ich kenne und ich kann nur haben, tut alles, was sie kennt, wir hier lassen, also unser Gefühl zwischen euch auf Kolponel 1, 2, 3, was Allah nicht zu geben, was wir soll tun, und was wir soll tun. Weil wir soll echt spielen und soll sein, denke von mir, Mama, schon mit der Simcha,
Okay, I want to point that this is 3 days later, the Rebbe would give out dollars and people from all walks of life could come speak to him. This is a video 3 days later. After this, it sent ripple effects throughout the whole Chabad world. The Rebbe said, oh my gosh, he said, I can't do it. You have to do it. Everybody has, he said, you know, I can't do this alone. I can't bring Mashiach myself. You have to help. You should do everything you can. Then people thought, oh my gosh, sounds like the Rebbe's like now giving it up to us. A woman who had lost her son came by dollars to the Rebbe, and she was distraught. And she said, how could you leave us, Rebbe? I want to see my son. She was a distraught mother. I want Mashiach. I want to have my child back. And the Rebbe, generally speaking, was grandfatherly. His approach was kind, encouragement. And this is an exception to the way he responded, particularly to a woman who was distraught. He was usually much more encouraging. But he was very serious about this call, about us taking seriously our role, bring Mashiach.
Rabbi, we was counting on you all those years for the Mashiach. Now you'll hang us on a tree? the sack is too heavy for us. It's impossible. We want the Mashiach. I want my son, Rabbi.
If it is not possible for all the Klal Yisrael, what can be possible for me? I'm only one person.
You're right.
You are here.
But you're the Rebbe. You are our father. No way. I want my son. I want the Mashiach now.
If I am a Rebbe, then I have spoke clearly, but it must be done by Klal Yisrael, you included, and this person included, and this
You're
person
right.
included.
You're right. But we're still counting on you. We are counting on you.
If you are counting on me as a rabbi, you have received my answer clearly, but it must be done by you and by you and by you, and have good news and psuli spirit.
I mean, this is a very unique video. But the bottom line is it's all based on this. This is the ideology. You, through your interactions day to day, everything is brought into your life, your stuff, your people, your experiences. Are you going to utilize them to bring light, to live with light? And the Rebbe said, actually, we have to start living. He said, as we get closer to Mashiach, we don't just do mitzvahs, we have to start living in a Mashiach way. We have to start thinking, how would I act if Mashiach was here? How would I act if I didn't, have my own shtick? More to talk about this, but this is just wanted to show you that video. Sorry we went over time. Have a great night. Good Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take
It's
care.
All the best. Be well.
Thank you,
Thank-
Rabbi.
Bye.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.